Call the meeting to order, please. This is a Village of Riverside's Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, September 20, 2018. The time is 7 o'clock. Please call the roll.
President Sugg.
Here.
Trustee Pollak.
Here.
Trustee Pisa.
Here.
Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Peters. Here. Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley. And not with us this evening is Trustee Sedeby.
Thank you. If you'll please join us for the pledge.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome to the folks who are here with us tonight and those of you watching from home. First up this evening are presentations and public comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the board this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on. There is no village president's report this evening. Manager Francis.
I do not have a report this evening.
Moving on to the approval of the consent agenda. On the consent agenda this evening, approve voucher list of bills September 20, 2018. Approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes for September 6, 2018. File and review the following. The Board of Fire and Police Commissioners regular meeting minutes May 8. Community Development Department monthly report August 2018. Finance Department reports for July and August 2018. The Fire Department monthly report for August 2018. And the Police Department monthly reports for July and August of 2018. Does anyone need anything removed for discussion? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve. By Mr. Ballerine. Second by Ms. Peters. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up, reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Are there any liaison reports this evening?
I had one.
Mr.
I
Ballerine?
actually probably should have done this under public comment, but I just wanted to remind everybody that this Thursday, 9/27 at the Riverside Country Club will be the Person of the Year dinner honoring Frank Gangware. I'm hoping y'all can make it. Tickets are still available at Aunt Diana's and Riverside Bank. So please show your support for Frank and all the good things he's done over the years.
Well-deserved honor. I hope a lot of people could make it for that.
And I did hear that Alex Gallegos is buying the first round of drinks. That was
Yeah, I heard the same thing.
Okay.
So that makes 2 rounds. Next up, ordinances and resolutions. First is an ordinance approving an accommodation for construction of a rear patio at 412 Bartram Road. Director Abt.
Yes, at your last meeting, you considered a request from the owners of 412 Bartram for an Americans with Disabilities Act accommodation in order for them to have a rear patio. The owner is disabled and they are seeking to provide a safe outdoor space for him to enjoy and utilize his backyard. The existing structures on the property have it exceeding its maximum impervious surface. Therefore, staff was not able to issue a building permit for it. They are seeking to remove an existing deck and patio and replace it with a new patio, which is larger than that existing deck and patio area. Typically, a zoning variance would be needed for staff to be able to issue the building permit. However, since the need is based on the homeowner's disability and not an issue with the lot specifically, the variation standards cannot be fully met. Therefore, in consulting with the village attorney, we advise that going through the ADA accommodation request would be the best course of action. The ADA Act does require that reasonable accommodations be made for people with disabilities. At the meeting, you discussed the request and agreed that the request seemed reasonable. However, you asked that staff notify the adjacent neighbors of the request and have the village engineer review the proposal and visit the site to determine if there was any possible drainage concerns that may need to be addressed as part of the project. You also asked that the ordinance approving the accommodation include a provision that the patio would need to be removed at such time that it was no longer enhancing the owner's enjoyment of the property. So the ordinance you have before you does include that condition. So it states that the patio be partially removed and the coverage reduced to its current, at least its current coverage when the patio is no longer providing a benefit to the applicant. We did have the village engineer come out and look at the site. He said that based on the small increase in impervious surface that it is, that he doesn't see it having any sort of measurable impact on the area as far as drainage or flooding is concerned. The neighbors were notified. They were sent a notification of this meeting and that the request had been made. I've not heard from anybody with any concerns regarding that. We did receive a comment from Trustee Pollock. He reached out to staff and suggested that the ordinance be recorded so that it can be found on a title search to be recorded against the property. Staff felt that this was probably a good idea. The village attorney agreed and has drafted a revised ordinance that includes recording and acknowledgement as a condition. And he has that if the village board is in agreement with adding this condition to the ordinance.
Trustee Valerie, just prior to the meeting, brought up another point, and that is in the condition provides that it be removed when the patio is no longer providing a benefit to the applicant. But the applicant is actually Northern Trust, who owns the property. So the suggestion was to change applicant to Mr. Zunin, because it's when it ceases to be a benefit to him that we wanted to terminate.
That change will be made. So I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance for an accommodation for construction of a rear patio at 412 Bartram Road. By Mr. Lumsden.
Second.
By Mr. Gisa. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Director. Next up is an ordinance amending the village code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to the licensing and operation of vacation rentals and bed and breakfast establishments. Just a point of clarification for those who might have watched the last meeting. The decision was made to not allow vacation rentals within residential districts. That was to have been put onto the consent agenda, but it was my thought that since we are still going to be allowing vacation rentals within the business districts, that we should take this opportunity to go ahead and make the revisions that this board and staff have worked on with regard to regulating those rentals. And the language regarding the not allowing them within residential districts is within this ordinance. So that's why this ordinance is on the agenda this evening. And Mr. Mars, I believe you wanted to say a few words about this.
Sure, yeah, just to follow up on President Sell's comments. What we did following the last meeting was amend the definition of vacation rental to add that it's a dwelling unit or portion thereof located in a commercial zoning district. So that is what will prevent them from being in residential districts going forward. And as you know, we're going to follow up with removing them as a use from the residential districts in the zoning code. But it did seem beneficial given a lot of the changes that had been made that were of general applicability to keep those because I think a lot of them made the overall ordinance better. The noise limitations, addressing pets, the square footage restrictions, all those sort of things were generally kept in. But what was removed was the things that had been added from discussion a couple meetings ago about notifying everybody within a certain number of feet. I think that was the primary thing that we removed.
The primary thing that was removed was that notification requirement and village board approval requirement
Yeah.
that had been discussed for the vacation rentals in the residential district. Since those would not be allowed anymore, we removed that portion from the revised language.
And I wanted to draw the board's attention to, because we're now speaking about vacation rentals within the business district, we're obviously speaking about much smaller properties than might be available in residential areas. So I wanted to just bring up whether you wanted to consider, right now we allow 5 guest rooms. I doubt that there's a condo anywhere in the business district that has 5 guest rooms. So I didn't know if some of that language was something that we wanted to tweak so that it's more directly applicable to the kind of rentals we anticipate and intend for the business district. So any thoughts along those lines?
I have thought on that.
I'm wondering if we should pick a number of actual guests that can stay in a home. So maximum of 6 people versus right now as it's written, it could be up to 20 people plus 4 guests. That seems excessive. And the concern would be that someone that is in the central business district or another business district puts up 4 walls and turns into a business operation. And then people that live behind that or around that are interfered with. But the numbers, I just think a smaller number might be more palatable for folks that do live in the business districts around town.
I mean, that's kind of where my thoughts were going as well. It was to perhaps reduce the number of guest rooms from 5 to 2.
Yeah.
And then make a stipulation that at no time could there be more than 6 persons on the property during a rental. And that would encompass whoever that would be. It would encompass children, vendors,
Yeah.
the owner. Just during the rental period, there would be no more than 6. That was kind of where I was thinking. Mr. Ballerini?
I like the idea of maximum of 2 guest rooms. I don't think there's, I just got back from Nashville, and I stayed in a vacation rental, second floor of a house. It was very clearly stated, no guests allowed. Period. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, no guests allowed. It's in the business district. If you want to have grandma over, I don't think anyone's going to argue with you, but I don't think we should allow 2 people to have 4 people over. That would be the 6. I think we should have just be no guests allowed. That's my thought. I would this time err on the side of caution and see how it works before we start. And service providers. I mean, in here it talks about, service providers. What if you can't have any guests? What's a service provider? I don't get that. If you can't have any guests, you don't have to worry about weddings or bachelor parties or anything like that because you can't have any guests. You can only have the people that are in the room. A wedding of 4 people is not a very good wedding. So I think we can eliminate a lot of that if we just say no guests. Eliminate it to 2 guest rooms and go from there. And if somebody has a bigger house that wants to do something, they can come and talk to the board.
Thoughts?
Do the children count as a guest if you have 2 rooms?
No, the original concept was that 12 and under would not be included
Right.
in the number.
Okay.
I mean, just to answer your question, though, Trustee Ballerini, the thinking behind that language about service providers really was kind of in the other scenario, where perhaps you had already maxed out the number of people that would be allowed and the air conditioner breaks. So it would allow them to have a technician come in and do service on something with that's what service provider was intended to refer to.
I don't think we need to make space.
So what do you think about
for
Trustee
the air conditioner
Ballerin's
repairman.
suggestion that it would just be, I mean, if you accept my idea about 2 guest rooms, it'd be 2 guest rooms, 2 people per room, not counting 12 and under, children 12 and under, and Trustee Ballerini would just like to say no guest. What do you think?
I'd support that.
Mr. Ball?
I guess I don't have strong feelings about it either way. I agree the more conservative, cautious approach is Trustee Ballerini, so I guess I would go along with that. And we can reconsider this after some time.
I thought I saw you shake your head, Mr. Lumsden. Yes?
I'm still trying to think about different properties that would justify, but if somebody had a piece of property that would allow for more, they could bring it into us and talk about it, and if it makes good sense at that point in the central business district. So I have no issues with those changes.
Either way on the guests. So if this is how we want to go and be more conservative and reconsider it later, that's fine with me.
So, Mr. Ballerini, did you also want then, if we're going to do that, did you want to take out the language referring to, I would say leave the language regarding events and things. I would leave it in, just in case down the road somebody comes in that has a larger property that we might want to consider. It is a little superfluous, you're right, but
But we're,
It's government. We have to be a little superfluous.
okay, if you're going to use those kind of words. Okay, yeah.
Okay, is everybody on board with that? So, what did you just?
I just want to make sure that the board is clear that based on the changes, Michael did touch on it, but I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Since it's been removed from the residential, the removal of the notification and it coming before the board, that the board is comfortable with that. Because there were previous discussions about the vacation rentals for licenses coming before the board.
But isn't it a special use in the business district?
No, it's
It's
permitted.
permitted, it's permitted in the,
Correct.
okay, so yeah, I'm glad the manager brought that up. Are we comfortable with staff managing the application process? Or do you want to see these things when they come to us?
Or do you want us to do the notification similar to what we do for any type of variation or special use and utilizing those guidelines?
I guess my opinion, I think we heard loud and clear from people in the village that they were frustrated they're not being notified. So why wouldn't, what's the downside of notification of the neighboring properties within 250 feet?
I agree,
There is no downside, right?
I agree. Okay, so, Mr. Morris, have you got those changes in hand?
The last version was 500 feet at the direction of the board. Do you want to do 500?
I think 250 in the business
But I think in the
district.
business district, it's going to be a little more dense, so it's, I mean, 250 is what we have for everything else,
Yeah.
right? And the only reason I think that people talked about 500 is you might only get one or two properties in each
In a
direction.
big
because
residential.
Because of the
properties are
size of the
larger,
properties, right, right.
I would think consistency would be better than on notification wise.
And so we would put back in that language that we had in the last draft about those notifications, board approval the first year and the first renewal.
I don't think the board approval part has any support. I think we're just talking about the notification aspect of it. Is that correct?
So then notify the surrounding community or surrounding residents, and then staff would still make that decision at that point. So they would be talking to staff if they had issues.
And staff always has the option, if they have a concern, to bring it to you anyway.
Plus with the notification, if there's concern, it's going to come here.
Right. Once people find out, we'll hear about it anyway. Correct, Mr. Pollock?
So this notification, would that come from the village staff?
Yes,
Or-
I think-
And so I would ask, we need to be very explicit in that notification that a license will be issued, not we're considering a license being issued, because the property owner would have the right to get that license if they meet. And I don't want to give people false impressions that this is like a public hearing notice where they can come and have a say in whether it gets issued or not.
So that should be done after staff has evaluated and approved it.
Why wouldn't we have it as special use then? What's the value of having it as a permitted use? Right? Because if it was a special use, then it would have the chance for somebody that lives 3 doors down.
Well, I guess the value would be that people don't have to go through a public hearing process, a 2-month hearing process to get their license. The other side of that coin is that the village would have discretion to deny one.
Well, but I think Mr. Linson makes a good point. I mean, what is the point of notification if we're simply telling you that we're going to do it? I mean, it seems to me the point of notification is to try to receive input from the residents if they happen to have an objection to it. So my thought would be, I kind of like what you just said, trustee, is this is going back to PZC to remove the residential vacation rentals. At the same time, we could ask them to consider making it a special use within the business district. And that way, we would have an opportunity for review, and the input from the residents would carry weight. It wouldn't just be a matter of us telling them that a license is being issued. And I think the 2-month wait thing, I mean, if somebody really is interested in doing this, I don't see that being an onerous thing. And the cost is what, $500 for a special hearing? Isn't that what we asked? Or special use, is it 500?
No, it's $1,000.
But that's a deposit.
It's a deposit.
And then, so whatever is not used is returned to the applicant.
Yes.
So what do you think about that option? I mean, the reason the logic behind the permitted use within the business district, I think, was that if you're going to have a residence within a business district, you're already anticipating a certain amount of noise, transiency of visitors that is associated with a business district. But given the concerns we heard with regard to the vacation rentals within residential districts, with regard to, I want to feel like this is my home, I like to know who's next door to me, I can see people having those same concerns within the business district. Mr. Pollak?
I would tend to agree, but I would say since the Plan Commission is going to be looking at this anyway, let's be open-minded and let them do their process and make a recommendation to us.
Okay. So with regard to tonight, though, if that's the anticipation, then do we want to leave it that staff is going to make the determination about issuing the license? Because if it ends up being a special use, which I suspect that's what's going to happen, this board is going to have an opportunity to consider it anyway. Just with regard to the language for this specific ordinance.
And I would think that the $500 fee the first time around covers all of the fees that are associated with. I don't think we should be charging $500 on top of, the application or the license fee at that. So it's just a flat $500 fee.
Well, Sonia said it's $1,000 deposit for the special use, but whatever's not used for the notification process is returned to the applicant. So what are the actual costs usually associated with it?
I would say you're probably looking somewhere between
$400, $450 with the notification and mailing requirements.
So do we want to waive the $500 license fee for the first year and just have renewal fees?
I would say we charge them the $500 for the first year, and we waive the special use fees.
That would be easier in terms of
That way we know what we're
administrative
doing.
cost, right, in terms of keeping costs and all. tracking
They would, but
costs.
they're as part of the.
That also justifies the higher fee the first year.
Yeah. What do you think, manager?
Well, also bear in mind, we're just talking about the process involving planning and zoning, so that's the cost estimate for that. But then, if we're still going to be doing on-site inspection between the fire department and the building department for a vacation rental, there are costs there. For the most recent license that we had received, that we had issued previously, there was a lot of time that was spent by both the fire department and the building department evaluating that one. So just bearing that in mind. So my suggestion would be to do the 1,000, but then also track staff time and draw down on that 1,000, not only for the special use, but also for the staff time for the inspections and what have you. Because really, that's why we charge the 500, is to try to capture our expenses as part of that process.
I agree with that, but I think if we're talking about two guest trailers and we're talking about a different kind of property, that's going to be most likely within the business district, I would think it's going to be a much easier process in terms of, so I don't know how much, I'm not sure that might be an apples and oranges comparison with.
But it's easier to give people money back from a deposit than it is to ask them for more. And at least we don't, I mean, $1,000 is $1,000, but if they think they're getting some of it back, and $450 is pretty darn close to $500. So let's always round up, right?
Mr. Pollak?
I would recommend leaving the fee structure
Yeah.
in place, the $1,000 deposit for the special use, the $500 for the license. If they get the special use, assuming that's the way we end up going, because I say that because this is a for-profit business enterprise that someone's beginning. It's going to cost the taxpayers money, both the special use and when they actually go and get the license, and the fees we charge probably don't cover our real costs, so I don't see any reason to change the fees at all.
I agree.
And remember that anyone applying for a special use is paying their business license fee in addition to that special use request.
I think you have to stay consistent.
Okay, so the fee structure stays the same. Okay. Anything else with regard to this? Okay, I would ask for a motion and a second to approve the ordinance as amended.
So can I just get clarity on the changes?
Yes.
So for now, we are putting back in the notice requirement, but if it becomes a special use as part of that zoning change, we would take out the notice that's in here, because then we have a separate notice requirement for the special use. You see what I'm
Correct.
saying? Okay.
If it goes to special use, the special use notification is already there and it covers it anyway.
Right.
Right.
So as part of approving that zoning text amendment, we would take out the notice that we're adding back in. Okay. And just so I'm clear on the other changes, maximum of 2 guest rooms?
Correct. 2 people per room, not counting 12 and under, no guests.
But we're still allowing 2 people per room, children 12 and under, owner, licensee, co-owners, manager, and owner's family members. We're just deleting 4 additional friends or service providers.
But was it with the children, wasn't it no more than 2 kids per room as well?
Well, when Attorney Marshall said that
Yeah.
so I think what we're trying to get to is 2 people per room, not counting children 12 and under, no guest, but at no time more than 6 people on the premises during the vacation rental period.
Right.
Right?
Assuming it's 2 rooms.
Assuming.
2 guests. I mean, would you allow 2 parents and 4 kids stay in a 1-bedroom apartment?
That would be a matter of whether or not the square footage was sufficient to allow that many people.
So we're really covered with the children on the square footage.
Yes.
So we really don't have to spell that out, correct?
Unless we just want to say that there's a maximum, some kind of maximum occupancy. We want to pay.
I think that would make it easier.
And just say.
Less great.
You can't have, because you can imagine a scenario where, let's say that there are 2 guest rooms, and then the owner and his family come over. So now you've got the owner and the family, and then the people that are renting the place. Now you've got 12 people. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We're trying to keep cap on the number.
Yeah, I can live with 6. I mean, if that makes you. Yeah.
Does that make sense, Mr. Morris?
And that 6 includes the owner?
6 includes
Everybody.
Includes children as well. No more than 6 persons during the vacation rental.
Got it.
Okay. So with those changes, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve an ordinance amending the village code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to the licensing and operation of vacation rentals and bed and breakfast establishments.
I'll make that motion.
By Mr. Pollak, second by
Second.
Mr. Gisa. Please call the roll.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up are considerations, and this is Director App's evening to shine. First is a discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendations on possible zoning code amendments to address impervious surface, nonconformities, and front entryways. Director Apt.
Yes, back in February, the village board directed staff to work with the Planning and Zoning Commission to look at making some clarifications regarding stoops and porches and awnings and roofs, and also asked us to look into revising the code that would allow changes to a residential lot that currently exceeds its impervious surface coverage for the zoning district without the need for a variation, provided some sort of net reduction in the impervious surface was achieved. This was in response to a variation that you had been reviewing at the time that needed a variation in order to install a front porch and also exceeded their impervious surface standards. So I think the board thought that what they were doing seemed reasonable. However, the code, as the code is written and as their lot stood, it made it difficult for staff to be able to allow that by right, and so we had to go through the variation process. So since that time, the Planning and Zoning Commission has been discussing these items that the board directed it to consider on several occasions, has now reached the point where it's ready to move forward with the proposed text amendment for public hearing. The proposed text amendments are first coming to you, however, for review and direction to staff as to whether to move forward with the public hearing. So first up, we'll talk about the impervious surface coverage. So the Planning and Zoning Commission initially discussed the board's request and draft text amendment language prepared by staff on existing properties that exceed the maximum impervious surface coverage. The draft language that was brought before them would have allowed new impervious surface coverage, provided a net reduction of at least 10% on the entire property was achieved. As part of the Commission's discussion, they struggled with what ultimately is the minimum acceptable net reduction in impervious surface. The Commission also noted that there's been very few impervious surface variations that have been requested in recent years, and that primarily these non-conforming situations have been dealt with at the staff level, with property owners either bringing their properties into conformance or choosing a permeable paving material instead. Ultimately, the Commission determined that it was not in favor of a text amendment allowing properties that exceed their maximum impervious surface to create new impervious surfaces without coming into compliance. And the Commission felt that the variation process was the more appropriate solution if compliance was not achievable. So the Commission also reviewed how other communities define, regulate stoops and porches and coverings and entries, and whether to apply different restrictions to those type of encroachments into the street yard. So staff provided them with a lot of information, our building code requirements for landings and stairs, and after quite a bit of discussion, they were in general agreement that every house should be allowed a primary entryway, that if it needs to encroach into the street yard, should be allowed to encroach in the street yard, and it should be allowed to be covered if they want it to be covered. So then it came down to trying to look into how do we allow something like that. So they looked into allowing an entryway landing that was no larger than 25 square feet to encroach into the street yard. They also wanted to allow that to be covered. So currently we restrict awnings and canopies. They can only restrict so many inches, just a few feet into the street yard. Our landings, stoop requirements, by building code, you're required to provide a 3x3 landing at any door that serves the house. So you're looking at a minimum to meet code 9 square foot landing. And then if you want it to be covered, you're restricted if indeed you're right at your street yard line, which in most cases you are. You would be restricted to only being allowed to have that awning or canopy coming out a maximum of 3 feet. So they wanted to allow a little bit more flexibility for property owners to do something that is appropriate for their specific house, because maybe it doesn't necessarily meet those requirements. The biggest complaint staff receives is that if I'm right there and I'm only allowed to come out 4 feet, which is the code currently allows for a stoop to encroach, if you have your storm door and you open it up and I'm only allowing you that 4 feet, that basically covers the entire landing, and somebody has to then stand on the stairs to open the door and be able to come in, or the person has to step down for them to open the door to let them in. So people have been saying that they want something a little bit larger than what our code typically would allow somebody, since most of our homes' front doors are basically right at that street setback line. So this was an opportunity for us to kind of allow a little bit more flexibility for individual homeowners. After a lot of discussion and trying to figure out that 25 square feet and that coverage, we ended up actually landing at 27 square feet because the code requirement is a multiple of 3, since we only, at a minimum, it has to be 3x3. So one suggestion had been 36 square feet, but some of the commissioners felt that 36 square feet just felt a little bit too large of a structure to have completely encroaching into a required street yard. So ultimately, they settled on 27 square feet as the maximum allowed size encroachment into a street yard. And again, that would be allowed to be covered or just open if they didn't want a covering over it. So what's been added to the code then is a new section. So instead of just having stoops and steps as a permitted encroachment, we now have a new encroachment type, which is this open or covered entryway, stoop, landing, entry, and it allows it to be encroaching into the street yard, provided it's no larger than 27 square feet. There's no setback requirement. There was some discussion about whether to require a specific setback, similar to other things, like right now stoops can only encroach a maximum of 4 feet. Canopies or things like that can only encroach a maximum of 2 feet into like a required side yard. There was some discussion about whether we should do that, but ultimately the idea was that we wanted to provide flexibility for homeowners to be able to configure something as they needed. So what you have before you is their proposed text amendment that does allow for that encroachment with that new encroachment type. There are also some changes to the definition of awning and canopy. Some of the discussion had been that the awning and canopy definitions were a little bit vague and very similar to each other. So those have been clarified. They actually match the definitions that we recently created for the sign code. And so those definitions have been added in there. You've been provided with some pictures that the Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed of various sort of entries across town, and you have the draft text amendment language before you. We're looking for direction from you, whether you're comfortable with what they've been talking about and us moving forward to a public hearing, if there's any specific items you'd like them to reconsider as they go through the public hearing process with the text amendment, if that's how you want them to proceed. So.
So, what do you think? They've been working long and hard on this. Mr. Pop?
One, I agree with their recommendation on impervious surface coverage. I think the whole point of considering that was that we shouldn't be in my opinion, we shouldn't be granting variations of impervious surface coverage when it's a situation that is just a financial issue. In other words, in most cases, a homeowner, property owner could just replace the driveway with permeable pavers and not need the variation. And when they're asking for more impervious coverage, or when they're trading it off, they can comply just by making some permeable pavers, replacing driveways or sidewalks. And I can't imagine a situation where a variation could be justified based on our standards, but there's probably one out there somewhere. I just haven't seen it yet. So I do agree with their recommendation in that regard to leave that because of the importance of stormwater in this village and working toward better stormwater management. I tend to agree with their recommendations regarding the awnings and canopies. I do think that there absolutely needs to be definitions of open versus covered. When I read that, I didn't. This is open and or covered, and what is that? What does open mean? Open on the sides, open just on the top? I would like to see graphics in there too that represent some of these requirements, but definitely definitions so that there's no question what we mean when we say open and or covered. But otherwise, I'm pleased that the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to tackle this issue.
Other comments?
Something I don't know if you can answer this for me, but I drove by Gage today on the way here. That was the variance that started this whole process. The porch he put on there, I don't think meets this requirement. I still think that that's bigger than.
It is bigger.
That's kind of what bothers me a little bit, because I think that Mr. Randall did a very, very good job putting that porch together. And, our reasoning for that was architectural integrity. So I think in that situation, the zoning process or the variance process worked. I would tend to stay with the variance process when it comes to porches, just like they're doing with the impervious. Because for a village that is so interested in their architecture, I don't want to restrict. If this gets in the law, someone could look at it and say, well, I can do it 3 by 9, but really it's better if it was 4 because of the way the pillars are. But you know what? I don't want to go through all the grief. I just do the 3 by 9.
Or they tear it down.
Yeah, well, I don't think you tear it down, but
Use it as an option anymore.
But it's just we're taking possibly the better answer off the table. That's kind of where I would fall. I would rather.
What is the better answer?
The better answer would be maintaining the architectural integrity of the property, and if the architectural integrity of the property would be a 4x8 porch versus a 3x9 porch, then I would like to be able to have that option, and I think that's achieved through the zoning process. I mean, in this instance, let me just ask a stupid question. If I wanted to, can I make my porch 3 foot wide and 9 foot out into my front yard?
For this one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which wouldn't work with dimensions. I mean, because like, and again, here's my position on this is when I see somebody saying that we should allow a 3x3 on the side or on the front of the house as a minimum, but then we use language, but more is okay if necessary to meet the building code. Why are we saying 3x3 if there's going to be an option to do more? The whole point of it is we're so restrictive, and I watched the P&Z folks paint over 5 inches, 6 inches. I don't have a tape measure to do this. They shouldn't even be worrying about the tape measure. That's why we have in our code that you have to hire an architect that knows these dimensions and knows what works. If you put somebody down to have a 3 foot wide stoop and they have a 36-inch door, their door is not going to be able to swing open all the way because it's going to hit the railing. So there'll be no instances where anybody that has a 36-inch door can have a 3 foot stoop. We need to get out of being so definitive and having numbers and square footages that don't make sense, because Riverside, every property varies anyway. So that's why we really need to figure out a way to make everybody comfortable with the variance process so that we don't end up with a favoritism position one way or another. But we can't be dictating codes that just don't work, because when we do that, somebody that can look at this stuff very quickly and know when to buy a home is going to know very quickly that it's going to be too much of a pain to do something. And if we really want to keep the integrity of the village the same, we need to be incentivizing adaptive reuse, not tear down, build maximum to property lines. So there's a half a dozen things in here that I just very quickly looked through that raise a concern. I mean, the 27 square foot, I have no idea where that came from. I know that they pondered over it, but 27 square foot to a builder means nothing. 4x8 sheets of plywood are 32 square feet. That's how you form up concrete. I mean, when you start to think through where carbon footprint goes, if we want to be a sustainable village, let's let the people that understand the construction and understand architecture come up with great ideas like Randall did. Like the home where we allowed the 64 square foot extra via variance so they could have a wraparound. It looks beautiful, and it was the right thing to do for our neighbors. If we didn't have that process, we'd have something that's not as pretty, or they would have said, screw it, I'm just going to tear it down and build some big box on there. That process is going to hurt our village more quickly than if we do tend to spend more time on variances. And then my recommendation would be to track the variances. If we have 2 or 3 or 4 variances in a year, then we stop and look and say, wow, you know what? There's a trend here. So then let's spin up the P&Z and spin up our legal eagles to figure out the good language to make that better for everybody going forward. But every time we run into a variance and then come back and try and cover it with a text amendment, I think we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money, and we're not really hitting the mark. Because it might work for this one property, but then all of a sudden we go, oh crap, it worked over here, but it doesn't work over here. So my druthers would be is to try and put a hold on text amendments until we can figure out how and how we can do these without impacting people that already own properties. When you start to devalue an existing property because we make a code change and we turn somebody's property into compliant to non-compliant, I think that that's doing a disservice to them. We talked about it a little bit last meeting, and I think that that's the message that I'm getting from people, that they're frustrated with us, both at a commission level and at a board level, that we're not being transparent, that we're sneaking through these little rules without really vetting them through. And I know your expression, I feel horrible about that.
Well, that's not true.
Well, I understand it's not true. I understand it's not true, but somehow we have to come out because perception is that we are. And I disagree with that. I don't think we are. I think we're incredibly transparent. But my recommendation would be to help the P&Z not have to try and get into 36 inches, 2 feet, 4 feet, and bolster up our language about having the professionals do their job and bring it to us in a variation so that we know what makes sense. That would make better sense to me as we go forward on that. And then it wouldn't be harming existing properties in a blanket approach.
But let me make sure, with regard to that point, Director App, so this would not prohibit somebody coming in for a variation
Absolutely not.
any more than the existing language we have right now. I mean, if an architect wanted to make the same argument that Mr. Randall made, he could still make it under this new language.
Yes, but now, instead of 1 or 2 coming in, 30 are gonna have to come in, because now all the properties are more strapped in. So instead of seeing 1 or 2 that somebody wants to try and do, there's no real way to make it work within here, so everybody's gonna have to come in and do it.
But that would be the case now.
The case now is you have a little bit more room to work with. We're not
This
stuck
actually,
to a
this,
3 by
this,
3.
this makes it larger, right?
Point of clarification.
That's
This
what I read it.
would not create any new nonconformities, correct? It would actually expand what people can do on their properties.
See, that's what I'm
No,
missing.
that's not the case.
It's
If I have a
not?
piece
What
of
am I
property,
missing?
if I have a piece of property that is currently has an impervious surface, and now I'm required, if I do anything, to reduce it by 10%. So I have a patio that I love doing, and I think it's great, and I want to change the material on it. You're telling me now I can't do that, I have to reduce it by 10%.
But that's not creating a new nonconformity. We're not, the Planning and Zoning Commission's not recommending any changes to that code.
No.
This one here is.
No, they're
Does
not.
Anthony want to explain?
No, that was an amendment that was brought before, that was potential language for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider. So the Planning Commission reviewed that language and ultimately in that discussion decided not to move forward with a text amendment that would allow that because they couldn't come to an agreement on what is an acceptable reduction. Do we really want, is our preference for people to come into compliance, or are we just happy with everybody only reducing their impervious surface by so much? So ultimately, they decided to just keep it the way it is. And currently, if you're non-conforming in regards to impervious surface, you're allowed to keep it, you're allowed to maintain it, but you're not allowed to add any new, you're not allowed to increase the non-conformity. So somebody who is non-compliant, if they want to build something new, that means they have to take away something somewhere else, or they've got to build it permeable. And that's their option.
Okay, perfect. That's helpful because that's not imposing harm on somebody. So if I have a patio at a house that is 800 square feet over the amount of impervious, and I decide to put a porch on the front of my house, exactly where my porch is, am I now going to have to do anything different with the back to balance?
If you already have that porch, and you're,
So I have a 800 square foot porch on the back, and I want to take my 3 by 3 front stoop and make it a 4 by 8 front stoop. So I've just lost 11 square feet of impervious zone. Do I have to take 11 square feet off my patio in the back or somewhere else to stay neutral?
yes.
Okay.
That's necessarily, it would depend on your coverage. Your coverage.
He's saying
but
if
I'm
he's
already
eight-
over.
if he's
If you're already over,
yes.
yes, okay.
Because a lot of them are. Again,
Yeah,
and the only
right,
reason I
right.
say that is because as we take a 50-foot wide lot,
Right, I got you.
75-foot deep, and we try and push the garages to the back, they're all going to turn into very challenging percentages on impervious to get the driveway all the way back there. Unless it forces them into a non-pervious driveway, which is fine if that's the way we want to go, right?
They would have to get that anyway right now, right, correct? If they wanted to add that 4 by 8 porch under our current code, they would need to seek
If
out.
they're over their impervious
If they were over the
surface,
impervious.
they can either take away that amount of impervious somewhere else on their lot.
I guess that's where I'm struggling to follow you on this one. Because as I read this, it's actually loosening the restrictions that are currently in place. And it still maintains the possibility for a variation request if somebody wants to make the architectural integrity argument. And it doesn't create any new nonconformities. Is that correct? To make it easier for people to do things. We're actually doing what you're suggesting. We're saying that we're giving people a little bit more room so they don't have that door problem that you're referring to. This is
So-
actually a more flexible standard than what existed before.
So right
So this-
now, we are held to a 27 square foot front landing that can encroach.
Right?
No.
The only
Currently-
properties we're talking about are the ones that are along like Burlington and Quincy and some of the 50-foot wide lots. Oh, and then I guess some that would have side corner lots.
Right, so currently, what we have, we don't have anything, that language is new. Currently, what we have is for open stoops and stairs. And they are allowed, so we have our porch regulations, and that's for porches. And then we have our stoops and stairs regulations, which says that they are allowed to encroach no more than 4 feet into the street yard. However, your steps or stoop are allowed to encroach more than that if needed to meet the building code requirements. So, if you need to have a 3-by-3 landing, but then to get down to grade with your stairs, you're gonna be encroaching more than 4 feet. This allows you to do that in order to meet the building code requirements.
Can you just stick to what's in the code right now? Explain to us what's in the code.
That's what's in the code right now. So in the code right now, open stoops and steps are allowed to encroach into the street yard no more than 4 feet. However, they are allowed to encroach as much as is needed to meet the building code. Then we also have our porch restrictions. So a porch, an open porch, is allowed, so you can't enclose it because then that's considered an addition. So enclosed porches are not allowed to encroach into a street yard, but an open porch is allowed to encroach into a street yard no more than 9 feet, with an additional 3 feet allowed for eaves into the street yard. That is unless your required street yard is less than 36 feet, and then it goes to a percentage, and then we also have an absolute then in that case. In absolutely no case shall a porch be closer than 20 feet to your front property line. So that's what's currently in the code as it relates to entry-related activities.
And the Planning and Zoning Commission is looking to liberalize that, to expand that encroachment allotment.
Yes, so rather than doing the 4 feet, or as the building code would allow, they want to provide a little bit more flexibility so that you could go out further than 4 feet if you needed to, and rather went with the square footage requirement. So that in discussions as we were going through the variation for a 173 gauge, some of the things that got brought up is that I have had to deny permits in the past for people that have wanted to do front entries that were not porches, it was a stoop, but they wanted to do something that, because of how their door was situated, I couldn't allow them to do what they wanted to do because it was more than, they would be coming out more than that 4 feet. They wanted a stoop that was significantly wider than their door. And so I've tried to be somewhat flexible and allow people to have a stoop that is 5 feet wide or so you could actually open the door. But some of that issue has been come in is that people want more than 4 feet to encroach into the front so that there's more flexibility with the doors and the landing size.
So I get that. So in that case, they would come in, if they want more, they could come in and do a variance.
And they don't want to do that. They don't want to go through that process. They want to just be able to have a reasonable stoop. And I thought the direction from the village board is we want to be able to allow people to do something that is reasonable for their front doors, for people to be able to get into their home. And that was kind of the Planning and Zoning Commission's direction as well. We want to allow something that's reasonable for people to be able to have. Everybody gets an entry. It can be covered if they want it to be, and it can be of a reasonable size, not just 3x3 or 3x4, because that's what meets code. So that was the impetus behind trying to come up with a size versus a strict amount that it would be allowed to come out.
And help me understand why we went back to 3 feet.
3 feet? For which part are you talking about?
If we had 4 feet now, you can't project out any more than 4 feet. And now we're saying the stoop can be 3 foot by 3 foot. It seems like we went back.
No, that's what the building codes, I'm just explaining, building code requires a minimum.
The building code says that at a minimum,
It must
you
be
have to have a 3x3 landing
at any door.
at any door. Right? And now, that's what the current building code says.
And our zoning ordinance allows for a stoop and stairs to encroach no more than 4 feet.
4 feet now.
Except where the building code would require it to encroach more in order to meet those minimum standards. It's because stairs are required to be, I think it's 7 3/4, and then the 10 1/2.
Do you have something, Mr. Bell?
I do, and I go back to the stoop porch thing. Front of my house, there's a door. If I open that door and walk out, I will fall 5 feet to the ground. I have a landing, probably 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep, railing around it with stairs going down. Has a roof that goes on it that's attached to the house itself. It's not attached to the side and it's open. Is that a stoop or is that a porch?
I would say that it's probably a porch, but
See, that right there, probably, that's the problem.
I'm not looking at his house,
And again,
so the way I'm hearing it, it
Yeah.
sounds like a
But
porch to
again,
me.
I think that's where I'm getting kind of hung up, is I know we're trying incredibly hard to this, but it is just crazy confusing.
Right.
And again, my only concern is to do something that betters the situation, both from helping preserve the feel of Riverside, as well as making stoops, porches, whatever you call them, safe and workable. And again, when I see dimensions like 3 foot, that's really dinky. The time you have a 3 foot stoop is when you're at grade and you need a pad right there to come off of, right? That's where you use 3 foot. If you're getting anything elevated, you need to give yourself more room for railings, right?
This discussion is revealing what I said earlier. We need definitions of all these things so that, I mean, what we think is a stoop is irrelevant. What the ordinance says is a stoop is what matters. There has to be definitions, and I think, too, graphics would help tremendously, so that, you read the definition, here's what this definition means in a graphic, and that I can help the staff with resources and finding people to do those graphics. I've done them myself. They can be done at not a lot of cost. But I'd like to see our zoning ordinance work toward a more graphic presentation of the standards, as well as defining these terms. And I keep hearing, from the Planning and Zoning Commission and from staff, well, they wanted to leave it open. No, it can't be open. It has to be definitive. Otherwise, we will continue to have these conversations for the foreseeable future. And the one other thing I wanted to add is, this is the beginning of the process, or the middle of the process. The Planning and Zoning Commission has not made a formal recommendation on what the ordinance should look like at this time. They're just saying, here's the parameters of what we want to have a public hearing for. Are we on the right track? And so, we'll have another shot at this. Trustees, the public can attend the public hearings on this and have their input, and this will come back to us in ordinance form with a recommendation, a specific recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission in the future.
I think the graphics would help out immensely, because, I watched it, they were struggling with trying to figure out dimensions and holding their hands up, and that's just hard to do if you don't do this every day and you don't understand the construction dimensions to make stuff happen too.
So with those suggestions, we're okay to proceed with the public hearing? Do you have what you need? Rick? Thank you very much. The next item of formal business this evening under consideration is a discussion of the 5-year financial forecast plan, 2019 to 2023. Director Johns.
Good evening. Presented before you is the village's 5-year financial forecast spanning fiscal years 2019 to 2023. The purpose of this forecast is to provide the board with information concerning projected revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for all village funds for a 5-year period. This forecast should assist in identifying areas and opportunities where revenues and expenditures may be adjusted. Much of the information and data used in preparation of this forecast has been obtained from internal financial records and trend analysis, discussions with various department managers concerning short-term and long-term expectations, and external sources such as the Illinois Municipal League and Illinois Department of Revenue. Department heads and the village manager will be meeting early next week to review and adjust 2019 budget expenditure items. Several items that I wanted to highlight in tonight's presentation is the reduction of several village revenue sources over the next 5 years. Overall property taxes are expected to increase 2.1% in 2019 from the final 2017 extended levy and 1.5% in subsequent years after that. However, the police pension levy is estimated to increase 4.08% in 2019 and 5% in subsequent years. This results in the general corporate levy expectations being relatively flat for the next 5-year period. If you view the graph on page 124 of your board packet, you will see that the police pension fund levy in green has increased dramatically since 2018. In 2001, the police pension levy was $154,000. In 2019, it is $1.38 million. This is approximately 9 times increase in less than 20 years. If you now reference the top graph on page 125, you will see the proportional increase of the police pension levy. This increase helps illustrate that the actual money received for the general fund operation levy is decreasing. The next item I wanted to bring to
The bar graph on 125, what we're seeing in green is the increasing bite that the police pension is taking out of the general fund.
Correct.
Thank you.
The next item I wanted to bring to your attention is state per capita taxes, or LGDF. These funds have been very unpredictable in collection due to the decreases in distribution due to state budget cuts. In state fiscal year 2017, the state decreased distribution by 10%, and in 2018, they decreased distribution by 5%. A slight decrease in expectation for 2019 has been projected, with moderate increases of 1.35% for subsequent years. The next item I wanted to bring to your attention, if you want to turn to page 129 of your board packet, is the general fund building and zoning fees. You'll notice that we've had several very high years of building fees due to new construction throughout Riverside. However, we've seen this revenue begin to decrease. It is currently estimated that the village will come in slightly below its 2018 budgeted amount, and that in 2019, revenues will decrease another $100,000. Overall general fund revenues are estimated to decrease $178,000 from the 2018 budget in 2019. The largest area of expense in the general fund are personnel-related costs. The 2019 estimates for those include a 2.5% increase in union salaries, IMRF decreasing from 9.57% to 8.31%. That's the good news of the night. And benefits increasing for 5% for the HMO and 11% for the PPO. A couple items for the board to discuss tonight is, would you like staff to address the general fund fee structures for 2019?
When it comes to revenues for our village, we only have certain revenue streams that we can rely on.
Correct.
Half of it being real estate taxes, or 47% of it being property taxes.
Correct.
And we see our property taxes increasing 2.1%.
Overall property taxes increasing 2.1%. However, the police pension portion of that is taking.
Let's stay with just revenue. Okay. So we see a 2.1%. What other revenues that we have? Franchise fees, okay, that seems to be somewhat flat. Mm-hmm. I really think that cable, franchise fees, I don't have cable anymore. I stream all my stuff, and I think people are going to figure that out. Telecommunicate, we get fees from
the state.
From phone?
Oh, from phone, yes.
Okay. The LDF is, we ever know. So the only way we have to capture more revenue is raising our fees, correct? And that's what you're,
Correct.
so basically a tax on, another tax on our residents, whether it be water, sewer.
Right now, we're just focusing in on the general fund. The water sewer fund is
Right,
set up to, so those fees do fully cover their expenses.
And I'm sorry that I don't mean to make the police pension fund the bad guy here. You guys are wonderful at what you do, and you pay into this, and we should obviously do our obligation, as we should, so.
I think the greatest challenge for the police pension fund, and it's noted on page 133, is that unfortunately back in 2000 and 2001, we were putting in what was actuarially required, and at that point in time, I don't know what the actuary evaluation had within it, and obviously things have changed statutorily at the state level, but 154, given that you have 20-plus officers, to me seems low, given my experience in other communities, given the current age and potential retirements that you have in the queue. So unfortunately, this board has somewhat inherited things that have happened at the state level that now you're addressing years thereafter.
Well, our village has inherited this.
Correct.
I mean, we're just stewards.
So what was your question?
Would you like staff to review the general fund fee structure for 2019?
And what does that encompass?
The largest fee categories in that are the building and zoning fees and vehicle license stickers.
I'm actually a proponent that we should reduce our vehicle license sticker for antique vehicles and motorcycles. I've said that now for 8 years. Even the state of Illinois does that. I mean, it's very easy to administer, because in order to have an antique vehicle, you have to have an AV license plate, and a motorcycle is a little stick. Neither of those items use our streets 12 months out of the year. So I would propose that we reduce that once again. This will be the 7th time or 8th time.
But your question is whether or not we want you to bring us a comparison, for example, of what building fees are in Riverside versus other communities.
Correct.
Yes, so she's not asking whether we want to increase anything tonight, but whether you want them to provide you with the information, comparative information about Riverside and other communities.
So you're picking those two buckets of potential revenue. Do you have an estimate of, I mean, chasing nickels? You chasing pennies? You chasing dollars?
Those are some of our largest fee buckets to try
And what
to.
percentage of our revenue are those buckets? Just for the people at home.
It's over $500,000.
$500,000 for vehicle stickers.
And over $400,000 currently for building and zoning related fees.
So it was the building and zoning?
Over $400,000.
So 900,000 total. And the zoning fees are dropping.
The zoning fees are estimated to go to about $325,000 next year.
Right.
Again, I think, and I know that they're saying the property values are going to go 2.whatever%, at the same time that other folks are predicting that we're at the peak of property values, and they're going to start falling, which means then people will go in to get their taxes reduced, and the revenue will fall.
That's
not the way it works.
the tax.
I'll let Jessica explain.
Go ahead, explain, because that's,
I will try to explain
Yeah.
it the most simplistic way. So essentially, the village levies X amount of dollars a year.
Right.
And so it only grows by CPI, and basically construction, as permits are issued, the EAV ticks up a little bit. But, so the pool of money that we receive never changes, other than CPI, so the incremental increase. So let's say property values go down, your property value goes up because you had an addition, his property goes down because he's got less square footage and appeals it. Your property tax will increase that subsequent amount that he'll see a reduction. So there's always a distribution. So another good example is we had a commercial property in Riverside that was getting a tax break because it wasn't fully occupied. It now is. So now there's a redistribution of property tax within the village and what your property tax reflects, because certain bills are only going to increase by CPI because we're a non-home rule community. And so what we collect on an annual basis, even though the EAV will drop, and I think there was a table in this or previous communications to the board, EAV may drop, but our property tax collections will remain. You won't see incredible growth, though, because you won't have any new EAV within the village. And so you'll just see that incremental CPI. But what we collect will not change, other than the CPI.
I think another way that I can understand a little bit better is all of the property taxes paid to local government is, think of it as a pie. That pie can only grow by CPI or a referendum that's approved by one of the taxing bodies. So every year, all the taxpayers are inside this pie, and if your property tax goes up by, let's say, 10% more than CPI, other properties have gone down the same, because the pie is still the pie. It starts with the levy. It starts with the levy of the local government, and then the assessor distributes amongst all the taxpayers who pays what to fill that pie. So when property values go down, it doesn't affect our levy at all. Or if they go up, it doesn't really affect our levies at all, individual properties.
Unless it's
And nor does it affect any other local government levy. Well,
It doesn't act that way, the levy's a levy, it still stays the same, and all we can impact is spending.
Well,
So if something's going up for police pensions, we gotta figure out somewhere else to cover it.
And that's why she's
Right.
asking about whether we want them to consider fees.
right.
Yeah, that's the point of the question, is why. And it seems to me it's just prudent to always take a look at the fee structure that we have with comparable communities. Doesn't mean we have to raise anything.
Or
but we should
look
at
at
least
where
have
we
the
can cut
information.
spending so we don't have to increase taxes.
If you can find places to cut
Well, I'm
spending,
just
I'm all to
saying,
hear it.
but again, I think that's what the residents need to say, are we willing to cut stuff, or are we willing to pay more? Are
That's
we gonna
always
hide it in
that is-
vehicle taxes, or are we gonna put it where the costs are actually at?
That's always the struggle.
Right.
I mean, we are a very leanly staffed
Yeah.
and a very efficiently funded government. So the choice increasingly in years to come will be increase revenue or decrease service. That really is the choice that we and all municipalities face.
Could you just answer me one more question, which I want to do for our listening residents at home? Out of the tax bill, how much of the tax bill comes to the village?
It's a small portion of the pie. The largest portion does go to the schools. I don't know that, you got,
approximately 15%.
okay.
Okay, so out of a $10,000 tax bill, $1,500 comes to the village.
Correct.
Okay. Just want you to know what a great deal you're getting on that $10,000 tax bill.
At least with regard to these services. What else for us?
Would the board like staff to readdress the fee charged to the parking fund on an annual basis? This fee has been set for several years, and we've increased it by CPI. We've done a lot of different parking lot improvements with green parking lots, and the maintenance for those is different. My suggestion would be into 2019, have the finance department, who administers the parking program, and the public works department take detailed notes of the actual labor and material costs expended, and look at addressing that rate.
That makes sense to me. What do you think?
Now, are we restricted by the Burlington Northern lease or some of their properties, or some of the properties that we use when, some of the,
For the rates?
right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have to get approval from BNSF on any rate adjustments.
On parking at their property?
On commuter parking,
Commuter parking.
yes.
Okay, so we probably,
What was that?
Doesn't matter who owns it. Is it a part
It's
of that
the-
parking lot village and part of that parking lot Burlington?
Correct, but we have to get essentially their approval for anything. There are some contracts or agreements with different, whether it's Union Pacific or BNSF, to the structure of the approvals. Like Union Pacific, you have to pay them a fee to lease, whereas with BNSF, for them, we don't pay a lease agreement, but we have to get their approval on anything related to charges for commuters.
for commuters.
So the cool parking lot over there, the new one over on Burlington, is that a commuter lot?
The new green parking lot?
Yeah.
No, that's for the business. But we have changed the code to afford, because we do have wait lists for various commuters for different lots, to afford commuter lot parking if they are willing to park there.
But if we own that lot and I'm a commuter, do I have to follow BNSF's rules on that lot because we own it?
With regard to fee structure, we don't change. So here's the other caveat. We don't want to charge more for our lots than we would for a BNSF lot, because no one then's going to want to park in our lots.
Well, the BNS lot would fill up sooner because it'd be cheaper, and then those who get there late would get hosed.
It's almost like rent control.
But to Director Jones' point, I mean, do we want them to?
I think we should look at-
Charging appropriately so we can recoup our maintenance costs.
Yeah.
That just seems like a kind of a no-brainer for me that we would want to do that. So yes to that.
Would the board like staff to present drawdown options for the funds held at IRMA and NSCBC?
That's the hardest.
Well, I think we should talk about it and probably understand the ramifications of those decisions.
Because that's where we probably get the best returns on our investments that we have right now. So in the IRMA fund. But yes, I mean, we have to look at everything. I'm sorry, Mr. Paul.
What is the current reserve fund?
It
Relative
was
to that.
over 400,000. So remember, it was back in 2013 or 2014 when I brought to the board doing an optional deductible. And so during that time, we kind of kept our budget level flat because we took on that additional optional deductible cost at the same time. So previously, you were taking the credit from IRMA as cash to offset your budgetary costs each year. So for the past several years, we've been holding that money at IRMA and accruing that additional interest, and it has served us very well. Essentially, even though we went over budget in that line item last year, we've accumulated over the past few years over $400,000.
And what's our annual expenses for, what's the word?
For our
Premium.
liability?
Yeah.
Well, our annual expenses fluctuate from year to year, but they're approximately, I think we have 225 currently within the budget. So we could pay for our entire IRMA costs next year out of what we're holding.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the advantage of keeping the money in IRMA versus our reserves is that they can invest it more fruitfully than we can.
That is correct.
And that leaves the principal, use the interest, right? That's a pretty good strategy to stay.
So yes, we want you to present those options to us.
Well, if we have a shortfall of $400,000, we got to get it from somewhere.
So a strategic standpoint is IRMA allows you to draw down monies on a quarterly basis. We also have deposited additional money within what they refer to as their optional deductible. So it's something new that their Administration and Finance Committee started based on some guidance from IRMA members. Happy to say I was the chair of that committee when that happened. And so essentially you're accumulating that additional interest on that bucket of money that you can apply. So we tried it last year, and unfortunately, because we got hit with 2 optional deductibles in 1 year, as soon as we put in, we were like, yeah, we're gonna need that back. And so they basically credited it to one of our invoices. We've done it this year, and we haven't had to ask for any of it back. So that will roll over to the next year. And it'll be put on our balance sheet as basically money that we have that we can derive down as a prepaid, essentially, and we can utilize it for other resources at any given time. But you have to request on a quarterly basis. So as looking at the financial reports, if we realize we have a cash shortage and we need that cash, we can go ahead and reach out to them and receive that. Similar with our benefits co-op that we utilize for health insurance. We have approximately, I think, a little over $100,000 that we could withdraw from there. That one, I would make the suggestion if we're going to pull cash anywhere, we would pull it from that because we're not really deriving any interest on it. That was a protection of if they had to do a supplemental payment because it's a self-insured pool. So those are different options. Those aren't included on the unassigned. So if you're looking at your balance sheet, those monies are under the prepaid. So that's the difference there.
What else do you need from us this evening?
That's all I have
That's
to
it?
present tonight.
Okay. Any other questions?
Could you please tell me the impact of the reduction in fees if we did the motorcycles? That'd probably be easy to tell because you
I
know.
will
Thank you.
calculate that for next board meeting.
I got to go out with it.
And then does motorcycles include scooters?
They do, but that's not my point. But
Any new business? We do have a need for an executive session to discuss the lease price of village-owned property. So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene. No final action will be taken. By Mr. Lumsden, by Mr. Ballerine. Call the roll, please.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good night.